He hurt him bad.
A vingança nunca é plena, mata a alma e envenena. Não é vingança, não é vingança. Eu estava preparado nesse momento.
What if I told you that the most feared knockout artist in UFC history was once being paid for his labor, not in money, but in alcohol? What if I told you that the man chasing a third UFC championship belt at 38 years old, once dropped out of school at 12, worked in a tire shop in a Brazilian favela, and was drinking a liter of rum every single day before he was old enough to vote? Alex Pereira, nicknamed Poatan, meaning hard wood in the indigenous Pataxo language of his ancestors, a name that means exactly what it sounds like. He is the UFC middleweight champion, the UFC light heavyweight champion twice, and right now, in June 2026, at 38 years old, he is stepping into the Octagon at the White House, literally on the White House lawn, to fight Cyril Gane for the UFC interim heavyweight title, chasing a third belt, chasing history, chasing the thing that nobody in UFC history has ever done. But before the belts, before the knockouts and the sold-out arenas, and the chants of Poatan from thousands of fans, there was a boy in the favelas of Sao Paulo who had nothing. And that is the story nobody tells you. Today, we tell it. Alexandro Silva Pera was born on July 7, 1987, in São Bernardo do Campo, a city within the sprawling Sao Paulo metropolitan area in Brazil. He is of indigenous Pataxo heritage, a community with deep roots in Brazilian history and a culture built on resilience and survival. But resilience doesn't pay the bills, and in the favelas where Alex grew up, the bills were always a problem. By the time Alex was 12 years old, he had already made a decision that no child should ever have to make. He dropped out of school, not because he didn't want to learn, but because his family needed him to work. He became a bricklayer's assistant, hauling materials, mixing cement, doing the hard manual labor that breaks grown men down as a child. Then he found a job at a tire shop, and this is where the story takes its darkest turn. At the tire shop, surrounded by older men who drank heavily, a young Alex Pereira was introduced to cachaça, a Brazilian sugarcane spirit. And in a world where everything felt heavy and hopeless, the alcohol felt like relief. His co-workers didn't pay him only in money. Sometimes they paid him in drinks. By the age of 16, Alex Pereira was drinking close to a liter of alcohol every single day. He would later say in interviews, "At that time when I was really lost, I used to drink almost 1 liter a day." He was getting paid in beer and rum. He was a teenager. He was already an alcoholic. And in the favelas of Sao Paulo, that kind of life has only one ending, and it is not a championship belt. Think about that the next time you watch Alex Pereira stalk an opponent across the octagon with those cold, patient eyes. Think about where that stillness came from. It came from a boy who had already stared into the darkest version of his own life and decided, somehow, that he was not going to let it win. The turning point came when Alex was around 21 years old. Broke, addicted, going nowhere, he walked into a local martial arts gym. Not because he dreamed of becoming a champion. He walked in because he needed something to grab onto. Something to stop the falling. He started with kickboxing. And immediately, something clicked. His coach at the time, Wilson Nunes, recognized the talent almost instantly. In fact, Nunes was so convinced of Pereira's potential that he told him he was too good for him to coach and connected him with higher-level trainers. That is how rare the gift was, even in its rawest form. The gym gave Alex what the tire shop never could: structure, purpose, discipline, a reason to put down the bottle. And slowly, painfully, he did. The alcohol stopped, the training intensified, and a fighter was born. What followed was one of the most remarkable kickboxing careers in modern history. Alex Pereira went on to become a glory kickboxing champion, winning titles at both middleweight and light heavyweight simultaneously. He became the only fighter in glory history to hold 2 divisional titles at the same time. And in those kickboxing years, he did something that would define the rest of his life. He fought a lanky, flashy, technically brilliant striker from New Zealand named Israel Adesanya. He fought him twice, and he knocked him out both times. 2 knockouts of the man who would go on to become one of the greatest UFC middleweight champions of all time. Those 2 wins would become the foundation of everything that followed. Alex Pereira made his UFC debut in November 2021 at UFC 268. He was 34 years old, an age when most fighters are thinking about retirement. He submitted his opponent in the second round and won a performance of the night bonus. 34 years old, making his UFC debut. Most people start their careers at 22. Alex Pereira was just getting started. Within 371 days of his debut, fighting every 4 months with relentless availability, he had already won the UFC middleweight championship by knocking out Israel Adesanya at UFC 281. The same man, the same result. A third time, the crowd at Madison Square Garden went silent. Then it erupted. Because what they had just witnessed was not just a knockout. It was the completion of a story that started in a tire shop in a Brazilian favela 15 years earlier. He then moved up to light heavyweight and became champion there too, making him one of the rare two-division UFC champions in history. He defended that belt multiple times in 2024, fighting 3 times in a single year, a workload that most champions refuse to accept. But 2025 brought the first real stumble. In January 2025 at UFC 313, Pereira lost the light heavyweight title to Magomed Ankalaev, a moment of vulnerability. A moment that reminded everyone, even Poatan, that he is human. But if you know Alex Pereira's story, you know that losing is not the end of anything. He came back. At UFC 320 in October 2025, he knocked Ankalaev out and reclaimed the championship. Thunderously, decisively, the way only Pereira can, and then he made an announcement that stunned everyone. In 2026, Alex Pereira vacated his light heavyweight title, the belt he had just won back, and announced he was moving up to heavyweight to fight Cyril Gane at the UFC Freedom 250 event on the South Lawn of the White House on June 14, 2026, for an interim heavyweight title. If he wins, Alex Pereira becomes the first fighter in UFC history to win titles in 3 different weight classes, 3 belts, 3 divisions, one man who used to be paid in alcohol at a tire shop. And here is where the tragic reality lives, because from the outside, this looks like the next great chapter, another belt, more history, more legend building. But the closer you look, the more complicated the picture becomes. Alex Pereira is 38 years old. He has already acknowledged that moving to heavyweight may cost him some of his speed. He said publicly, "I know I may lose something, but I'm willing to pay that price." That single sentence tells you everything. A man who has spent his entire life paying prices, dropping out of school so his family could survive, giving up alcohol so he could survive, fighting through every setback so his children could have the life he never did, is still willing to pay more. He has 3 children. He has spoken publicly about how being a father reshaped everything for him. He once said, in a moment that moved fans across the world to tears, that when he was broke and couldn't afford to feed his sons properly, he felt a despair deeper than anything the Octagon had ever given him. "I hope no dad has to know that feeling," he said. The man who could once barely feed his children is now paying for people's groceries in his Brazilian hometown when he visits. He built the Instituto Alex Poatan, a foundation that provides free martial arts, English, and computer classes to over 700 underprivileged children in Sao Paulo. Children who live the exact life he once lived. Children who might be standing at the same crossroads he stood at, between the tire shop and the gym. He didn't just write a check and walk away. He built something real. In January 2026, he was awarded the Beacon Award for his community service. A UFC champion who grew up in the favelas, now receiving awards for giving back to the favelas. But here is the tragedy that sits quietly underneath all of that. Alex Pereira's body is 38 years old, in a sport that has already claimed the health of so many fighters who stayed too long. The knees, the hips, the hands, the brain. Every training camp pushes him further into territory where the margin for recovery shrinks. His move to heavyweight, while breathtaking in its ambition, also means he is now walking into the octagon against men who weigh 240, 250 pounds of pure muscle. Tom Aspinall, the current undisputed heavyweight champion, has already said he believes Pereira will lose some of his most dangerous quality, his size advantage. At light heavyweight, Pereira was the biggest man in the room. At heavyweight, for the first time in his career, he will not be. And yet he chose this, because Alex Pereira does not know how to do anything halfway. There is one more layer to the tragic reality of Alex Pereira at 38 that doesn't show up in the fight stats. He carries Brazil with him everywhere he goes. In Brazil, a country where football is religion, Alex Pereira has done the unthinkable. He has made combat sports matter. He has made a boy from the favelas matter. He has shown every underprivileged child in Sao Paulo that the most unlikely starting point does not have to be the ending point. He chose to raise his own children in America, specifically citing security as the reason. He said he is not at peace with the level of safety in Brazil for his family. And that quiet admission carries tremendous weight. The man who represents Brazil's pride to the world, who is celebrated by millions of Brazilians every time he walks out to that octagon, does not feel safe raising his children in the country that made him. That is not a criticism of Brazil. It is a window into the complexity of what it means to come from where Alex Pereira came from. Fame doesn't erase reality. Success doesn't rebuild the favela. And so here we are, June 2026. Alex Pereira, the boy who was paid in rum, who drank a liter a day, who dropped out of school at 12, who worked a tire shop while the world looked the other way, is about to walk out onto the lawn of the White House, in front of the entire world, to try to do something nobody in the history of the UFC has ever done: win a title in 3 different weight classes. At 38 years old, the tragic reality of Alex Pereira is not a story of failure. It is a story of a man who has fought every single battle at a disadvantage and won most of them. But time is the one opponent that nobody beats. And every round that passes, every camp that ends, every knockout that lands, it costs something that doesn't come back. His mother isn't begging him to stop like Islam Makhachev's mother. His foundation is still running. His children are watching. And the little boy who once had nothing is not done proving just how much a man can become when the only thing he has left is will. Alex Pereira, at 38 years old, is one of the most extraordinary human stories in the history of sport. Not because of the belts, not because of the knockouts, but because of where the story started. A tire shop, a liter of rum a day, a boy who couldn't afford school, an indigenous Brazilian from a favela that the world forgot about. And now, the White House lawn. If he wins on June 14th, he makes history. If he loses, he has still lived a life that most people could never imagine surviving, let alone conquering. The tragic reality of Alex Pereira is that the clock is ticking on a career that was never supposed to exist in the first place. And he is spending every last second of it fighting. What do you think? Can Poatan become a 3-division champion at 38? Drop your prediction in the comments right now. I want to know. Like this video if it gave you goosebumps. And subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. See you in the next one.